So it is my pleasure. A good friend of mine at the FDA, Daniel Walter, I call him a stand-up comedian. He's actually a lot funnier than I am, and I'm not funny. He is going to talk a little bit about in the day, the earlier conversation we were having about digital transformation. It just comes to mind, these little green receipts that go in product recall notifications, and you expect consignees to sign off, and you wait for the mail system to return them to you if you're lucky. And here we are, this is what, 2023? And we're still resorting, we have a privilege of having Amy from the Mayo Clinic who processes recalls, and she says she has a stack that overwhelms her desks of FedEx notices and snail mail of recalls that she has to process. And why are you sitting over there? Aren't you supposed to be over there? Okay. But, it really astonishes me. Here we are, we're talking about digital transformation in manufacturing and trying to notify patients of a defective device that could result in potential serious harm. We're still resorting to the United States Postal Service, and I'm not downing or dissing the Postal Service, but it just seems to me digital technology could really speed up the way we notify the Amy's of the world of, hey, this product is a safety issue, right? Because it's her responsibility to actually get in touch with the patients and get those products out of distribution between her and the patients before harm occurs. So this is an exciting work group that we have convened. I don't know how long, and Daniel will talk about it. And it's gone through some various stages of beta study and initial pilot to see how using electronic technology to notify healthcare providers of defective products, right? That recall notification. And also the side benefit is consistent communication for our friends. I think we call them friends, the recall coordinators in the district, the FDA districts, right? They have certain information. So the initial results look really good. And Daniel, I don't want to steal your thunder, but he's like me, he enjoys gardening. I just built it was supposed to be a mutual project between my wife and I, half garden house, half tool shed. And it's looking really, really nice. It's almost a mirror spitting image of our Cape Cod style house. And I said, okay, well, what side do I want to put the lawnmower and the shovels on? He said, no, honey, you're not. I said, well, what do you mean? That's my house. That's my she shed now. So I'm glad you like gardening. Daniel, come on in. So now I'm dealing with that. Where am I going to put all my tools? So tell us a little bit about yourself. It's good seeing you, man.
Thank you.
Okay. Hopefully the slides will appear there. He promised me he had 745 slides, traditional FDA. He's not going to go through all of them, right?
They're all legal.
They're all
We're
legal.
going to read each word on every single slide.
Excellent. You go for it.
Well, good morning, everybody. Thanks for coming, paying attention. A bunch of great talks today. The fun fact for the day is the longest day of the year, so which we are blessed with abundant sunshine on the longest day of the year. Maybe not, but we do have a great team that are working with us on this project. And I do want to take a moment to point out in the title here, we're talking about earlier, Zohair did a great job, brought up two critical things for his project. One, you got to know your process, and two, you got to know your people. That's one of the things that stuck with me when we're thinking about this topic, and you'll see why as I go through a little bit of the discussion. As you are aware, CDRH, Cisco has done a fantastic job of putting this forward on our behalf we're trying to work towards, in this collaborative community, involving as many stakeholders as possible for the various initiatives that we have. And what we learn from each stakeholder is a unique piece to the overall puzzle. Improve safety outcomes, because in that center, which it's actually right next to the center, but it's kind of its own quadrant, is the patient. We take patients very seriously. Most all of you do. You're in the medical device industry. Patients are at the core of what you do, regardless of which facet, healthcare provider, consultant, the agency, however it works, even software. You're working for the patient. So when we think about it in these terms, these holistic, high-level terms, it's going to seem a little bit jarring when I say I'm going to dive right down into the weeds. But for this particular instance, I think it's important to set the context as almost down into the dirt on the level of weeds to prove a point. We're most of us familiar to some extent with the recall process. We don't want to be. Recalls are one of the least fun aspects of the regulated industry, but it is a necessary part of what we do. But when we look at it, much like as we've looked at other programs, we looked at VIP and we've looked at CSA and we've looked at other things, when we look deeply at something, we realize that sometimes things are as bad as they seem and sometimes they're not. Why did I put the statute and regulation on the slides in front of me? Because that's where it starts. When I say I'm diving right down into the bottom, I'm going right there. We have, at the agency, a responsibility to ensure that reports of corrections and removals, aka recalls, are happening. Those derived into regulations, and we all know why. If something's hurting patients, you gotta get off the market. Pretty straightforward. What gets interesting is when you start looking a little bit further and deeper into the regulation. One of the things that jumped out at me as I was thinking about how I was going to present this talk is like, what is the crux of the problem that our group is handling? And here, buried very deep, 21 CFR 806.10 C 11 and 12. Wow, how far down do you have to get to that? The manufacturer or importer shall include the names, addresses, and telephone numbers of all domestic and foreign consignees of the device and dates distributed, and a copy of all communications regarding the correction or removal and the names and addresses of all recipients. Huh. Now, at its absolute top level, it's because we want, at the agency, we wanted to know that you know who you're sending it to, you know who you're sending recall notices to, and that they know that you've got it. Seems pretty straight. Those two little numbers on reflection are billions and billions of dollars and millions of devices every single year. The impact of those two tiny subsections on the economy alone. When we think about it, how does a recall work anyway? Well, you got us. We exist. Then industry, sure. Healthcare providers, well, that's part of what we're here. And of course, we've got patients. FDA tells the industry what we think that should be going on. Got the statute, law, reg, great. Industry makes products, make them for patients, or make them for the healthcare providers, and then those get distributed to patients. Maybe industry sends it directly to the patient. Oh wait, maybe industry doesn't have just it. Maybe industry has more than. Maybe they want to have a buffer. There's a distribution network. So the industry will send devices to the distribution network, which then in turn gets sent to the process or down directly to patients. On first look, going back to that comment, how complex is your process? And now we're starting to talk about data. Because now we're in a big data era. Every one of these arrows is not just information or a product, it's data. When something goes wrong, patients are going to let somebody know. Maybe they'll tell industry directly. More than likely, they'll tell their doctor. who will then in turn tell industry. We're supposed to, at least. Maybe the hospital will just straight up file MDR and tell us directly. And maybe even the patient will come directly to the FDA and tell us. All these arrows, all this information, was made of a system that was created before electronic communication. Do you think about what this entails? Hey, the title, snail mail, let us into this. All of this used to be done through courier, snail mail, and it's almost unfathomable today. Why would we even consider remotely doing something this way? Well, FDA notices that this is a problem. It is not just a problem of executing the regs as it is, it's also a problem of the perception of executing the regs as it is. We give guidance. Guidance is our friend, and in this particular case, pointing out the communication of appropriate points of contact at each direct account is the most effective way to ensure that they know the product in question is subject to a recall. I said this as almost a setup for Amy, because this is going to be relevant as part of our discussion. Similarly, to verify that your recall communication was received by your direct account consignee and that they understood and recall, and that's what we're talking about today. These lines and what is just guidance, but the execution of it is far more complex. One more guidance on how to execute it. Industry will go through and make the steps. They'll take their consignee, they'll call, or contact, send emails, do whatever they need to. And everybody that's worked in the agency's classified or recall almost can tell you instantly, and anybody who's worked in industry will tell you instantly, it is not 100% on the first shot. In fact, it's often very, very, very low, which is odd when you think about it. We give in guidance, we say that you may take steps to make the recall effective. You can't just make one and done. You have to actually take extra steps. Use alternative means, contacting your customers or sending a follow-up communication. Wait a minute. We have email systems, but does that mean we actually may have to send a letter or a fax to a company or to a care provider or to a customer or just to make sure that this recall has happened? Well, the communication that we have, the understanding that industry and we have, the answer is yes. We want to make sure that the recall is completed. And that's amazing to me. But to summarize everything that I've thrown up here on the screen: 1, industry is responsible to tell if FDA has a problem. 2, industry is responsible for getting the message to direct accounts. 3, industry is responsible for communicating that the direct accounts got their stuff. 4, providers should tell industry that they got messages and complete recalls. 5, industry is required to tell FDA everything. Boy, does that make a big, daunting challenge to industry for executing a recall. It's like the responsibility falls on them. So how does it actually work? Like most of you know, I'm not going to sit and try to tell you the way it works in some kind of theoretical construct. You live it every day. We've gotten past the point of requiring snail mail. You can use electronic communications, sure. Most businesses at this point are allowing electronic communications. So we're way past this point. But we have that statement that I made before. You can't just do it. You have to find another way. Success assumes that every program, again, call back to Zohair, every process works as intended with known roles and responsibilities. All stakeholders know what their responsibilities are, and all stakeholders agree that negative patient impact should be minimized. And I think that's something here, at least intent, we can all in this room, we can agree, negative patient impact should be minimized. If we're all coming to the table, that's one of our goals. Maximum patient benefit, minimum negative impact. So then why do we struggle? there's your top level question. Why do we struggle with recalls? The regulations identify things. The pathways are suggested through guidance. The execution is known. We have a clear understanding of patient benefit and and minimizing patient risk. Why? Recalls struggling. What are we missing? No, we're not. Not yet. We'll get there. You're not missing paper. But we've heard a lot of discussions over the last day and early this morning about how maybe we can find a way to do this without paper. So it's those kind of ideas that we want to keep going. All stakeholders know their responsibilities, but a stakeholder may not be knowledgeable of another stakeholder's responsibility. Everybody stays in their lane. And why wouldn't they? Is it up to the provider to understand how FDA works? It's up to FDA doesn't technically have to understand how industry works, but we try. Industry is the one sitting there, as I mentioned, that they're kind of sitting at the cap of all of it, trying to figure out what they need to do for this, need to do for that. We agree negative patient impact is important, but it can only impact what's in your control. FDA can't go out and tell providers to start coughing up data so much as anybody can. It's not my statutory, I have a limitation there. Maybe, if we think about it in terms, we have an identified problem. Maybe if we can come to an agreement that we're just going to have a neutral place, open forum, state a problem, a hypothesis problem for an issue. And I'm going to say this in terms of, I'm talking about this in terms of recalls, so I ask you, I implore, beg you, think about this in terms of problems that you are experiencing. It is not limited, the concept is not limited to recalls. There's your call out. Without any fear of repercussion, to find potential solutions that satisfy requirements and work in the joint interests of all the stakeholders, and in our case, especially patients. We're calling that our safe space. Now, the image of the stump with the buried hatchets, and that is, I think that's important because a lot of people get kind of defensive about, well, I can't do this. This is my limit. I can't say that. You're asking me to do something. It's like, well, we're not here to immediately ask somebody to do something. We're looking for solutions and seeing if we can find a way to yes. What can we, the collective group of stakeholders, do to reduce patient exposure? Can we navigate a system set up decades ago with modern tools? Snail mail doesn't cut it. Or does it? Maybe the system is there. Is it necessary? Maybe we have a bunch of problem solvers sitting in this room, all over the internet, and in every office, in every industry, every organization. Maybe it's time to actually dive out of the swim lanes for a minute and talk about a problem and let's solve it. So with that, I'm going to transfer to Iris Sherman, who's going to actually give you a little bit more detail on our safe space. And Iris and I and Paul and all the members of the panel have been working together. At first, when I started on the project, I was skeptical. Number one, safe space already gave me the squicks. I'm not sure that I necessarily like the title. Thought triage would be a better title, but it's not mine to own. But when you see the passion involved in the people and you see motion towards a shared goal where everybody is just willing to throw away the normal cautions and have the discussion on what matters, it gets me energized, and I hope it gets you energized too. So give them a chance to.
All right. Hello, everybody. Nice to be here. And as Daniel just described, Safe space, it's my slides, okay. So I can just start. So I've been a part of Safe Space for a while. I work for the MITRE Corporation. We are the trusted third party that is really in the middle of helping the Case for Quality initiative go forward. And we work with all the stakeholders that are like you sitting in this room. And it's a very exciting place to be. So we're going to move to, what's that? I'm moving to the middle of the room. Oh, yes, there it is. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to move to the next slide. I can do that myself. So Safe Space, you just heard the introduction to that. And I have to say that I've been a part of this group, leading this group for almost a year now. And I have to say it's evolving. It started with governance, but it has truly moved into a place of understanding our industry's problems and trying to collectively find a solution. So now that we're past governance, we really do sit down and ideate problems. And you're going to hear about the big problem that we have been working through today. But we do identify a problem that we potentially can solve because we have the right people in the room. We even have more now. And then we move forward to figure out how could we solve a big problem to help the industry move forward. And then we would share the results with you. So this year has been an extremely impactful year. We have over 10 medical device manufacturers, very large and small, medical device manufacturers sitting at the room. And we are extremely fortunate because now we have hospital providers in our network. We really lucked out. We bumped into an amazing group that collectively had more than 15 very large hospital systems all discussing one big problem: recalls. And we bumped into each other. Thank you, Amy. And she brought them to the table, and now we realize when we sit at the table, we're not just one-sided talking about the industry side of handling a recall, but we're actually getting the perspective of what goes on inside the hospital when a recall happens and the number of loopholes it has to go to get to the right person. And interesting enough, industry thought, well, maybe it's risk management. Oh, maybe it's supply chain. I don't know. What happened on the contract that we signed through our distributor to say, who is the point of contact? Is that really still the point of contact? We don't know. It is literally, we don't know. And that has been the big aha moment, and this is what we're working through. So, recalls. Daniel did a great job describing the pain of a medical device recall. We know it's an old process. We know that the biggest challenge besides the product identification is the product location. Where is the product in the hospital? How many are in inventory? Is there, supply chain management tools in place to identify where those products are and how many off-site provider systems are in place that also have those products. So we need to get to the removal stage of the product, and we need to identify that. So what we have come up with is understanding, yes, we have digital communication. Could we use digital communication? How can we design a form, a web form, or something where we could get all the information that we need, make it extremely simple so that you could actually escalate a recall in one day from the time the information goes out to the time it's received and get that supply chain in motion. Repeatable process. That's really what we're looking for here, is to move into, after the identification, a repeatable process so that ultimately at the end, the patient does not receive a product that has been recalled. And that does happen, and we all know that does happen. So what we have created is a unique templated form using standard Adobe. It has gone through 10 rounds of iterations, working as a team, understanding that it's just not a read receipt. It goes beyond a read receipt. We want to know, do you really have the point of contact? Are you the point of contact when you receive this email? If you're not, let us know. Do you know who that person is? Do you know what department that person is? And if you don't know, tell us that too, so that that point of contact can be stripped off the identified list, and we move on to another way of finding the points of contact. So, where did we start? We started with an alpha test. After we created the form, we used this amazing group through the Mayo Clinic to identify a small group of hospital providers to receive the form, fill it out, get the right information, get it back to us as fast as possible. The average turnaround time from the time that the form went out through email to the point of contact, that was the right point of contact, was 3 hours of a return. So it's really possible if all the information is available. It was really exciting. When we started this and they all worked, we were cheering. We were like, oh my God, we may be onto something here. This is a regular form that could be embedded in an email. And it's a standard Adobe sign here, move you down the list. I didn't bring a view of it, but we will be sharing. And then we finished the alpha. Kudos to all of us at the room. Now we moved on to the beta. We have 4 large medical device manufacturers who are outreaching to small, medium, and large hospital systems to send out the form. We were thinking, okay, the alpha was great, works great, we're all ready to roll. The beta, we are dead in the water. We stopped. It has been 6 weeks now, and we meet every other week, and we have not been able to initiate the beta. And do you know why? Because the manufacturers, unfortunately, don't have the point of contact. They have gone through their sales and marketing channels, their distribution channels. They have lots of contact names and emails, and none of them are actually accurate. So we know we have a problem. We're going to solve it. We may go back to the working group, the recall management working group in the hospital system, and go that route. But once we finish the beta, which we will hopefully get through in the next 6 to 8 weeks, we're going to move on to a very large study to truly put this in motion. And this is where we need you. We need the entire ecosystem of medical device manufacturers, hospital providers to come together to help solve this problem so that we can put in motion a digital form. We don't really need to change the regulations. We just need to put together a process that works, because the regulations allow for digital communication. But the process in between has not been established and determined, and that's where we are. So the recall study, we know that it will reduce time. We know that once all the channels are in place, you can actually have a recall notification completed in 24 hours. You will have that request beyond a read receipt, documenting the date, the time, the point of contact, and that the steps toward removing the product off the shelf will happen. So there's that flexibility in the acknowledgement that is so necessary. There's the proof of contact that is so necessary, and the proof of action. And then there's a resolution at the end. So, safe space to date, really exciting place to be. We have meetings every other week. Everybody shows up. And it's an hour of everybody's time. And it is so impactful. We are truly energized to solve this problem and other problems that the industry is having. We just finished a summit 2 weeks ago where we ideated some really big problems that involve process, which is really poised for safe space to solve process problems. So we truly have established a collaborative environment that's growing and will grow. We have extremely high engagement, and we have ideation for the future. I'm going to stop there.
Don't be bashful.
Okay, my panelists.
Bring them
We don't need that anymore.
Okay. So, okay, and I can hear me being heard. Okay. So, after my talk and Iris's talks, the point, well, first I want to make sure that everyone in the panel gets introduced. We met Mark yesterday, and myself and Iris would like to take a chance. Randy?
Sure. My name is Randy Paisley. I work for Baxter. I am one of several field action coordinators, so my day-to-day job includes managing drug recalls as well as medical device correction or removals.
And Amy?
My name is Amy Conway. I work at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, and I am the recall analyst for our value analysis team, which sits within supply chain.
Thank you. As we've hopefully led in not just why and what and how the safe space is, I encourage you as you think about the safe space, certainly we're always interested in input from you as to what you've heard so far, and we're going to discuss more. Also, if there's an idea where safe space to you may be an appropriate application, but it's not necessarily with the recalls, please also feel free to ask questions on that. We're here to help push the idea of the safe space. So we'll start. What were the significant implications and factors to consider when prioritizing speed to safety in the recall notifications in the digital age? Are there any particular technologies or approaches you believe would hold promise in further augmenting these processes? Oh,
That's a great question.
Yeah, so when we were doing the whole project, we decided, we ended up picking the recall as the option here. And up front, it was like, of course, you just send an email. And, and it's like, well, let's make it easier. And so the team, like I said, 10 evolutions, but it started before that with a Word document that's like, what do we want to do? What information do we want to deliver? And then that just evolved. So these are the questions that need to be answered, and different stakeholders gave different responses. And when we started the safe space, FDA, MITRE, and industry were there. We didn't have the providers in the safe space, and so that then was another group that got added, and then Amy will talk about that. But that helped us talk about how we want to speed the digital transformation. I mean, what do we want to do, and what kind of concepts we want to use during that time. So, and we wanted to do something that was simple. And I think Iris, actually, you worked on hey, let's use an Adobe form. And it's like, how complicated is that? But you can talk about that.
So I will continue on that discussion. So the reason that we also thought about a form was that from the hospitals and manufacturers discussing with their customers is they got a lot of negative feedback on having them sign up to a web portal. They didn't want another web portal to sign up. They wanted something simple. They were like, can we avoid the web portal? Can we avoid giving an email? Can we avoid having another sign-in opportunity? Can't there be something that could be sent immediately? I fill it out. Real estate companies do it. Banks companies do it. Oh, we're talking about an Adobe form. And honestly, I didn't even realize you could modify it to every single level of every single input that you wanted on the form. And you can, using a regular Adobe account. So that was kind of an eye-opening for all of us. We could even pre-populate the date, which was like, wow, we can pre-populate the person's email the minute it comes in. So I'm like, wow. So now we're down to 1 minute of inputs from the actual person who's going to receive it. They just have to acknowledge that they got it. everything else is already in there, and they just have to say that they really are the point of contact. So we evolved to that, partly also through the guidance of the FDA, because the read receipt was just not going to be acceptable. So what? They get it. So what? You get a receipt. Do you really know, like, is there going to be next steps here? So we needed to move beyond that, and that's what the form allowed us to have that capability in the language, in the form, besides the standard recall information about the lot number and whatnot. It's really the receipt and the acknowledgement of the receipt side of it. So I'll let my colleagues over here, maybe Amy even.
One of the things that we struggle with with recalls is letting people know that yes, we did get the notification and we're working on it. There wasn't really ever any centralized type response that we could use. And when the Adobe form was sent out, it was like, there we go. Now I just need to fill my name out, date, got it, we're working on it, send it back. That was something that was so easy. And normally that process is so difficult for us because we're trying to get it back. And as we're trying to get the acknowledgement back, we're getting an email asking where the acknowledgement is, and we go back and forth and back and forth. And so with the form that Iris basically created, it really took a lot of the pain point out of just saying, yep, we got it. I'm not returning product right now. I've got it in my hand. It'll be communicated. So I really liked it, and it was as easy as she says it is. It probably was a lot of work too, but.
Not really. We had a lot of fun behind the scenes.
Yeah, I think that the Adobe form is very promising. Like they've said, I think a lot of providers are hesitant if you present them with a portal, if they need to sign up for something. Adobe is an application that most people already have on their computers, so it's very easy for them to open the email, fill it out, and then send that acknowledgement back to the manufacturer so that we have everything we need then to let FDA know that our recall was effective. The discussions we've been having in Safe Space have been really small scope, I'll say. So just trying to figure out the form piece of it is very small. And I know that there's likely many hurdles to come when trying to figure out how to implement this in the real world. I know still trying to identify all of our points of contact. How do we identify this? How do we maintain this list? If it's an individual email, what happens if the person leaves the company or moves to a different role? So ideally, it would be good if companies could have a shared mailbox, so it's not an individual email address. But all of these still are things that will need to be, I think, worked through in the future, down the line.
Steve.
Hi. So just a couple of general questions. I'm curious about in the creation of Safe Space, if you learned lessons from other industry segments like auto or aerospace, and if so, what are the lessons that you learned? And also, what's the lifespan? I mean, excuse me, let me rephrase. What's the timeline, in your view, for moving beyond piloted assessments of Safe Space towards a more kind of fully adopted and launched program?
Iris.
So I'll answer that. Thank you, Steve. So the MITRE Corporation actually has decades of experiencing working in the industry, developing public-private partnerships. Our vast experience goes into the automobile industry and the airline industry, setting up similar types of environments where you're bringing to the table the lessons learned, obviously, through solving problems in the airline industry and in the automobile industry, but the regulators, the industry partners, and even the consumer groups. And so we envision our Safe Space to also go in that direction to eventually bring in patients. Right now, we're not there yet, so that's to answer that question. But on this pilot, I'm hoping truly by the end of the summer, we will completely finish the beta and move into a much larger arena, hopefully get volunteers from maybe this room and the work of MDIC to outreach to the industry who wants to participate in this, who wants to help figure out at their own organizations, do we have a channel identified to get to the recall at the end so that we could do more testing, larger testing, and then it's a matter of the industry saying we want to adopt this.
Will MITRE be able to apply strategies used in other industry segments to try to grow participation across the device industry?
Yes, that is absolutely from our lessons learned. We do envision that we will be able to use the same types of practices that worked to grow our evolving group and beyond.
So I do want to add one thing to the time and scope. When will we know it's done? One of the things that I think has been particularly interesting about the entire endeavor is that we entered into the safe space with a hypothesis. We were going to solve some aspect of recall, but then we found something out and our TAC realized that it wasn't the right focus, so we changed. We started to work on this particular form. When we started to notice gaps in information, distributors are not considered as part of this. Their contact points at the providers are not always consistent. Constant lists are out of date as a result. And as a result, and when you consider all these, it's like you have this form and it will solve a problem, but look at how many other new issues you've uncovered along the way. And is that something that, do we need to continue on that to approach the next one? Or is that something that, is it prioritized wise? Is that a lower priority than something that we've seen? But acknowledgement that that's something that we've found.
I'd like to build on, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
but something you said about problems we found along the way. So here we're thinking, a digital notification is so great. But one thing that's come up is how do we ensure that these external emails, when they reach the providers, don't end up in a spam folder somewhere? Because sitting in a spam folder is no better than sitting on someone's desk, a paper sitting on someone's desk unattended. So that's still, a problem that we're aware of and we'll have to work through as well.
And we actually did experience that.
Right,
The
that's-
one
I
hospital
wanted to bring that up.
provider, it just got bounced. It never made it there. And we had to actually reach out personally to the person and say, you need to accept this. This is coming your way for a real purpose.
Right, and then they did clear whatever path that was blocked on their firewall, so now they're able to get the emails. But yeah, it's a hospital. We're very, it's very locked down with their information. So
if I may, I was actually, part of my question was around that because from a technology perspective, from a technologist, that the whole Adobe worries me. And from an email perspective, it also worries me that that's not sustainable, right, as we move forward. One of my thoughts around this is that if you considered personalized medicine and direct-to-patient communication and how that's going to, expedite the process that we're going to need to be able to put into place. Have you guys thought about that from a panel perspective? And are you looking to how individualized this needs to go and how vast and quickly that needs to go in what you're considering as solutions for pilots?
Well, on this one's particularly, when we started, we basically, the first forms were Word documents, and we were saying, well, recalls can go to a doctor, they can go to a hospital chain, or they can go to the patient. And they need to be different. The letters, the content would be different depending on who you're going to.
Right.
So we then just focused on the hospital chain and making sure that, figured out that one versus figuring out what those others would be. The medical device, like you said, the device, we could go directly to the patient on some cases, depending on the product. But the hospital chain is the ones that are going to have to contact the patient directly. What's their methodology going to be? So each one is different. We're not going to, trying to get all of those at this point. Trying to get the first connection. That's the biggest one we saw directly to the hospital chain first. But then, yes, I totally agree. I mean, there's all these issues.
Like blockchain technology can be utilized in order to get to some of this root problem here, right?
Right.
And whether or not the group can bring in some of that technology in order to look at that.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, you could switch the technology as long as we know this is the information sets that we have to deliver.
Exactly.
So we'll get the user requirements with this pilot, but to be totally scalable for everything, we might need to change technologies. But
Absolutely.
the information structures, I think, we're going to be set.
And in the circumstances where you're talking about direct to patient, at least with the care provider or within a distributor, you have some traceability. But when it goes there, what's your traceability to a patient? It's that, and then everybody here that's purchased home software for themselves, they understand exactly how this works. You get a registration card.
Mm-hmm.
Now, how many of you fill out those registration cards? Some of you are probably very vigilant. Great. Some of you, Cisco, maybe not so much. And I say that to prove a point. If that's the level of variability we can expect on patients who are now going to have to go through and register every product that they purchase, every time, now there may be tools. And I'm going to make a few people nervous when I say this, but we have this wonderful gift in the form of GUDID, UDI, sitting there waiting to be tapped. How do we work that into the registration process? Could it? Is this a key that we're sitting dormant on? I don't know. I mean, as it is right now, we're having a little more of a fundamental problem in the form of just contacting the care providers. That's going to be solved before we get to any of the larger what's a better mechanism. It's not, we could still do it at the same time, but technology could be in the way.
Yeah, we see that as their safe space project down the road.
Exactly.
Is use of UDI. I've been in class 3 implantables, and I was involved with, my team was involved with patient registration. And, this is a class 3 implantable in you, pacemaker, defibrillator or such. And, maybe in the US 50% registered. Outside, internationally, no. It was more like 10%, and because it's distributors involved. And if it could be simplified to a point like you use your camera, like everybody knows QR codes, could that be a way of doing it? And then you have the UDI information and the patient name and everything linked together simply. That's all future concepts that are out there. But this is a starting point, and the UDI would be a great way to index everything with the recall, but we're not there yet. So.
You wouldn't cover past implants, right? So for your implants that are 30 years old in people's body, you're not going to capture it.
Right.
That's right. That's right. That's a good point. But truly having a part of the patient record is a possibility.
Okay. What are notable insights or discoveries that could be applied to enhance recall notifications in the digital era? And how have these insights showcased the potential for more responsive and efficient recall processes? Let's start with Randy.
Oh, I wasn't ready for that. I do think your UDI proposal is quite interesting. I think if that was able to become a widely adapted practice, and it was, if our customers, whether it's a distributor, whether it's a patient, whether it's a hospital, if they're registering the devices that they have with that UDI, and manufacturers have access to that information, it would give us a much clearer picture sometimes of where things are at. I'm just thinking with, electromechanical devices like infusion pumps or something. We have our tracking systems, but sometimes those devices move around so easily, and the customers don't tell us where they've moved to. So then we're sending a recall notice to a facility that doesn't have that pump anymore, and they're trying to find where it is, and it can get really complicated. So if the UDI registration was something that became a widely adaptable practice, I think that could be really key in effective communication.
So with patients' rights, could you guys access the Epic Health or the patient records to get the UDI information out of it?
So with patients' rights as a concern, could you access the information to get it out for the purpose of this recall?
I don't know if it'd be the manufacturers, but the healthcare provider would have that information.
They
So
would.
somehow would we link? How do you link that data so you can,
That's
de-identify it in between where you don't
Yeah.
know them versus a patient. Patient registration, they're giving you the access there, but in other cases they're not. So.
Yeah, and we don't have, I mean, personally, my company, we don't have implantable devices, so that's a whole, like, a different train of thought for me. Our products that we do ship direct to patients, we have that shipping record, so at least there, we have that to go by. But for implantable devices, I don't know, that's maybe more Mark.
And I can
Right.
say from Mayo Clinic, a lot of times people will ask me, we need to get this information to the patient. And I tell them, I'm in supply chain. I can't access patient records, but our providers all have some sort of protocol in place so that they are able to communicate with patients if there is a recall or a product issue, if the patient needs to come back in. And so we don't normally see any sort of patient records, but they definitely have a communication system outside of supply chain to get that information out.
And one of the questions that came up is how do we improve the process? And for the industry, I think, if there was like a common email that each provider would have that we would use, that'd be great. I'm not sure that's impossible. But Amy, you mentioned that you're in a group of like a large group of providers that meet on recalls. You guys talk about this. So there is a group that can help drive that change on that side too. If you want to tell what that group is about.
Yeah, we, probably about a year ago, we started to see portals pop up, supplier portals pop up. And they started to really just mess with our recall. We have a centralized recall system, and so all of the recalls come to me. I process them, I look up through the purchasing, I send them out to anybody and everybody that was affected by the recall. We have over 60,000 employees out there, so they can all be touched by a recall. Excuse me. And so one of the most important things was that we were talking to a company about their portal, and they kept telling us that, I don't know why you guys are having such a problem with it. Everybody else really likes it. And we're like, well, maybe we're doing something wrong. So we went to a couple of providers that we know and work with recalls, and they were very quick to say, we won't use the portal. That doesn't work for us. We just can't. It's not in our process. And so we started to talk, and as the more we talked, the more people we got involved, and all of a sudden we have we call it RMIG. It's a recall interest management group. Recall management interest group.
Yep.
And every day I get requests from providers asking to join, just so we can talk about this one particular, this whole recall thing with communication. It's so hard on us because we'll get half the information one day, and we'll have to contact somebody to find out, what lots are affected or something like that. And then the day goes by, and I'm sitting here with this thing that says urgent on it, and I've called the numbers that they gave me, and everybody that I've talked to has no idea what I'm talking about because it's a recall and they're customer support. And so, it gets a little nerve-wracking when you have this urgent medical device recall sitting on your desk, but you don't have the affected lot numbers, and you're waiting for something. And so, come to find out, we all have that situation going on. We all have the same pain points, and so we have banded together. We meet once a month. Iris has been there, and it's just providers only, and we don't talk about recalls. I mean, specific recalls. We talk about the process, the communication, and how we can make a difference with our collective voice.
We have a question from the virtual audience. How will manufacturers be incentivized to use this digital communication form? Many use third-party companies to handle recall efforts. Will this method be part of a revised FDA regulation for manufacturer communication processes? I'll handle the last part of that question last. So let's start with Iris.
That's a really good question. I actually have to bounce it to you or our panelists because I can't represent manufacturers. I'm a trusted third party. So this is really a manufacturer-specific question on the incentivized part of it.
So one of the things, if you look at the FDA guidance document on recalls, it's a guidance, which means it's not the regulation. And you went through the regulation, it's very specific. In the guidance document for the recall, why do people send letters to the hospitals? Because if you look in the appendix of the guidance, it says, here's an example of what the letter should look like. So everybody copies that. And that's
Right.
why it is done that way. If in the guidance document you put, oh, here's an example of different ways it could be done, I think the FDA could probably modify the guidance and show there are like, these are different communication methods that could be used. And then everybody would not say that they have to follow a letter and use snail mail. So that would be, I think that would be the only way, because you don't want to define, because technology is always changing too. I mean, 10 years from now, it's like, you just get an app on your phone and there it is. And so who knows?
Yeah, and I think our hope too is that, I mean, we've only started the testing on this. I think if the testing can be done on a bigger scale and we have the data to show, here's the time it takes for a company to get a digital notice and respond digitally versus the time it takes that same company to get a paper copy and respond with a paper form they scan and email back. Just the data to show the difference of how much faster it could be if it's done digitally, I would hope maybe would drive people to manufacturers to bring that data to whoever needs to see it to actually green light maybe the change in their process. Maybe more manufacturers need to change their process to move towards that digital way of doing things, and having the data points to show how much better it is would be helpful.
That would incentivize, because it's like if I can close a recall, if I don't need to have 20 people working on this recall for 3 months, I can get 10 people working on it for 10 days. That's an incentive to switch.
If I may, this is Ravi, to the first part of that question, from an industry perspective, I just wanted to reiterate what Joe Sapiente had mentioned earlier. So the safe space effort that we've gotten going here through MITRE and MDIC is really, really connected with the collaborative community. Because it is a case for quality collaborative community. So the first step, I think, is really to make sure the pilot is successful. And to the point of incentivizing, I think once the pilot is successful and the communication that occurs through the collaborative community to the industry will actually then just drive the benefits, just because the efficiencies that will come out of this are going to be so poignant and so self-evident. But I think spreading the message, which is I think also what Steve was alluding to yesterday, how do we get this broadly across to the industry? I think that's going to come quite a bit after the pilot through the communication channels of MDIC and the broader Case for Quality collaborative community. Just want to share that perspective as well.
Completely
Dan,
appreciate.
you can answer the second part of the question.
Yeah.
Anyone else?
Sure. I completely appreciate that. So as far as third-party companies handling recall efforts, the tool here could actually be used by the third-party recall companies. So this is not something that would replace or obsolete them. In fact, it would be something that would be another tool in their tool bag to get to what they need. Will this be part of a revised FDA regulation? Not likely. If it's already compliant with a regulation that's on the books already, then we're not going to see much in the way of incentive to change a regulation. Especially, consider the entirety of the summit to this point. What has Cisco's overwhelming message been? We are not going to change regulation. We want you as industry to find the solutions on your own so that we'll help move things better together, faster. It's the same thing here. If there's a solution that doesn't involve us having to go through a very arduous and painful process to change a regulation or a statute, all the better. Ultimately, we want patients to be less at risk. That's the entire purpose of getting recall communications to and from. So to that end, no, I don't think revised regulation. However, as far as communication methods, since this would come, as Robbie very actively pointed out, is it comes from the collaborative community. It doesn't just come from the agency. It's going to come from us. It's going to come from industry. It's going to come from providers. It's going to have a giant glowing PR campaign that says, this is something that's in your benefit. Please consider using it. And then word of mouth hopefully takes it from there. But yeah, I don't think there's going to be necessarily that much in the way of FDA needing to do anything.
What's your suggestion on tracking?
Microphone, please.
I thought we were going to be throwing a microphone around. Where did that?
I don't
yeah.
recall.
Where did that idea come from?
No,
we were joking during our pre-meeting that we'd be throwing a microphone around the room today.
How are you guys gonna track the communication that you're sending out to show that you sent the communication out? Like how if they didn't respond, when you should send it again?
So that's the beauty of Adobe. Adobe, once you send out these forms through a specific email, it tells you when it was sent, when it was received, and you actually, the person who manages it gets a receipt that it was sent and gets a receipt that it was filled out, and actually gets the form, the true legal form back, and that can be used as a legal record. So the manufacturer, using Adobe, would be able to do that as well. Right now, we're doing it through MITRE versus SafeSpace, but the manufacturer also has that capability once the form is sent. So yes.
So I'll add on to the question that was brought up earlier about it not being sustainable, which is also a fair point, as Adobe may not be sustainable.
True.
Most of the systems that would be developed if the concept of this form works,
Right.
and I'm looking at certain solution providers in the room that would likely have created or will be thinking about creating a mechanism within their own solutions that would incorporate the concept that we're talking about, a return receipt, that connection of delivery that would allow that traceability to still exist.
Exactly.
So I think Adobe, yes, that's what we're currently seeing.
Right.
As we consider the evolution of the project, it's perfectly reasonable to consider that more better softwares that have stronger capabilities would be able to handle it as well.
So are you taking a co-signee list and uploading it into, some program to pull all the emails off to send them individually?
That's how you were doing it at Baxter, right?
No, you mean current process?
Yes.
So current process, we don't send via email. So
No,
it's,
but for this pilot, you were actually collecting your
it was very
known-
for
the known
for the
emails.
pilot, it was very manual. We were
Yeah.
just reaching out to providers to see if they'd be interested in participating in the pilot to basically test the form for us. So the plan was to send them an email test notification and then an identical paper notification through the mail, and then basically measure the time difference in how long does it take them to receive that notification and how long does it take us to receive a response from them. So we haven't been able to execute that yet, but the pilot was on such a small scale to begin with that we would, at least the plan was just to do it manually for now because it's only 6 providers.
Yeah,
and
and I
then
was thinking of
and then the
something like
idea is
100,000.
so
But
future state we
your
would have
point-
to figure that out at some
Exactly.
point. Because
Whatever
we have-
you think you could
Yeah.
would work in your own electronic system, whatever that system is. Yes, you could do anything.
Thanks.
Because sometimes consignee lists can be very, very large. You can have
Right.
thousands of consignees for one recall, so there's not going to be one person sitting there send 1,000 times,
Absolutely right.
So that's still a challenge we'd have to work through.
Yes.
Yeah, hi, building off Daniel, your initial schematic with the blue and the red arrows. One thing I didn't hear and wondered if, as you guys were scoping out the solution, did you talk to any distributors? Just because often they have many, many ways of contacting and places with the customer. So maybe that would be a way to help and see what they're doing as a practice on how things go out.
That's a good point. We should probably add to the safe space, 1 or 2 large distributors
I agree. I
and
think
put
that
them into
would
the
be really
program too.
helpful.
and
Absolutely.
What technologies they're using. I mean, one thing with the thing, emails, like, yeah, but you want, how do you want to know this is a secure email? It's not, it's not a spam or something like this. So, the providers have to be sure that doesn't get spoofed either. So and that's why everybody's gone to portals. I think some of the providers, some of the industry, but I think we have to look at something that's more consistent and worldwide almost because we're doing this here, but as a medical device manufacturer, you don't just do recalls in the U.S. You do it all over the world. And so how does this then scale to be worldwide also? And so that's going to be the future, I think, as we continue to scale up this pilot.
Yeah, and I know one of the when I first came on and then the pilot project was being fleshed out, I think there was someone from, and you might remember his name, from, I think he was from the automotive industry. And
Oh,
one of my
yes.
biggest takeaways from his speech he gave us was, start small. So
Exactly.
when we first started, it was, well, let's focus on this healthcare provider notification. We know that we also have to notify distributors who then have their own set of customers. And we know that we have to notify patients sometimes, but we were hoping just to start with that provider notification first and then branch out. But it is you're always thinking ahead, so understanding that that's still something we'll have to work through as well.
Yeah, that's a really good example because that was the example that they started a pilot study on the airbag recalls, and it grew to, just a pilot all the way to industry wide, and how would they do those notifications? So this we've been learning some of the other industry examples of how do you start small and how do you grow.
Yeah, it's difficult because the discussion always gets bigger.
Yes.
Even when we're trying to keep it as small of a focus as we can, it always expands to, what about this? What about that? And
Exactly.
it can be difficult.
I think another thing that's important to realize too is the distributors handle more recalls than a manufacturer does because they're handling everybody else's recalls. And so I find that when I get a recall that's like a sub recall that comes in from a distributor, it's very uniform, it's very easy to understand, it's the same form every time. They take everything out of the manufacturer recall and they put it in their own format, and I think that they would be a really helpful to join in Safe Space because even though we're all dealing with recalls, they receive those recalls. So if they don't receive the recall because they didn't, because it's late in coming, then I don't find out about it. And so, I think that would add just a nice other level to that so that we're able to understand everybody's process.
Yeah, and actually, as you said that, I thought of something else. So we haven't even touched on this yet, but we've been focused so much on the digital notification. We also, hopefully, are trying to make the recall letters look a bit more standard across industry. I think that we all include similar information, but just in terms of what it looks like to our provider customers, or really any customers, if they can get a letter from multiple different manufacturers and have it all look the same, they know where to find everything. I think that would be great too, and I think that's a lot easier of a practice to adapt. So that is something else we're working on. I wanted to just bring that up. It's a little bit out of
and now where you got me
scope,
going.
but yeah.
Another thing too is that when you talked about the documents, we receive these documents on a printed piece of paper, or we could get it in an email, and it's a PDF. How are we supposed to, when there's 40 pages of hundreds of item numbers, how are we supposed to get that data out of there? We have to take we have to take the whole PDF apart and cut and paste to get those numbers out of there. Now, I'm assuming that these numbers at some point started as an Excel sheet. So wouldn't it be easier just to send us an Excel sheet, but we get so much pushback because it's editable, and we don't want you to be, we don't want you to have that information. And so at Mayo, our recall process is automated. We have a bot that goes out. So I just give it all the numbers that it needs. It goes out into our ERP. It pulls all the purchase. It tells me exactly where it was, and it does it in about 6 minutes. And the biggest time-consuming thing of using the bot is having to pull those little numbers out, and sometimes 5s looks like S's, and sometimes there's a 0 and it's an O, and it depends on what kind of font people are using. So, just getting that data in a usable form right off the bat would save huge amounts of time for everybody, because then I'm passing this along to the end users, and the end users are sitting there looking at the PDF going, how am I supposed to check this? And so, if there's one thing I can put that plea out is it is so much easier when something is in Excel that's we can use right away, instead of having us call in to see if we can get it, because I know that you guys are thinking, well, we'll put it in a PDF and it's protected. We can pull that PDF apart and pull those numbers out of there. Just, that's what we have to do to get that information. So if you want to help us out, an Excel sheet is awesome.
But we can't mail you an Excel
Yeah,
That's true.
That's very true.
It has to
Good
be
point.
digital.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, final question for the panel. Drawing from the successes and lessons shared by the panelists, what practical steps or recommendations that attendees can undertake to enhance their own recall notification processes? I think we just started on that.
I think so. Go for it, Amy.
Let's see, let me think. Another thing that is hard when you get a recall is that there is no number to call and there's nobody to contact. So if you don't know that, if you don't have that, you're talking to your colleagues, asking them, do you know the sales rep? Do you know anybody? Does anybody know anybody from this company I can reach out to and figure out what I'm looking for here? That would be huge. Another thing is that we have a centralized recall system at Mayo Clinic, and so anytime that a paper document is sent out, it comes to me. Our mail team pulls those out of the mail. So I get stacks, Paul wasn't exaggerating, I get stacks like this on my desk. They're all the same recall, and they're all to individuals throughout our enterprise. It could be in Florida, it could be in Arizona. And so if we could just get it so we have one email coming to the right person and that the process can begin, that would be huge. But I understand, that there are drawbacks to that and trying to get everybody. I'm just so glad I found Safe Space and the people that are in Safe Space. Before that, I had no idea. Who do you talk to at a cocktail party about recalls? Nobody wants to talk to me. So it was just a blessing to stumble upon this group and realize that we had just started our interest group and they had been working on something, and to pull those people together, and it's like we all do have the same pain points and we all do have the same ideas to solve it, and so I'm just so glad that I found this group, because it makes the future a lot brighter for me.
I guess for me, I would just hope that any manufacturers listening to this discussion have really got their wheels turning about the digital recall notification process, if they're not already. I think most manufacturers still send recall notifications via paper mail. So I guess just looking inward at your own recall process, how can we go about making this more digital? What would that look like? Who would need to be involved? Do we have recall contacts identified, their email addresses? If we don't, how could we get them? Not saying go out and run and get it now, but it's just what steps would your company have to take to do that? And I don't know, just maybe starting to have that conversation now would be a good place to start.
One of the things when we first came up with a draft, the Word version of this is we sort of threw everything into it. It's been slimmed down a little bit, but one of the concepts I was thinking is have a picture of the label and show this is where the part number is located, or have a QR code for the manufacturers on their website. So everybody's now using QR codes. Everybody knows what that is now. So take a picture of that and it goes to your website and it tells you what you need to do that's not in the letter. I mean, there's different things that you can help enhance the provider's experience. And so that was some of the concepts. And then have it as a checklist. I mean, this was really funny when we first created it. Jennifer Kelly was on, and we were talking about, well, what do you want to see in a recall letter? She said, well, I got this recall from my car dealership, and this was the best one I've ever seen. I said, show it to us. And so she put it up on the Zoom screen, and okay. So let's just look at a checklist of this is what these are the 3 things I want you to do. So those kind of things versus just trying to, instead of just don't write paragraphs and paragraphs of information of this is the recall and this is why, and from a legal point of view the FDA wants to see this information. Write the letter for what the provider needs, what you want them to do, not what the FDA wants to see in the letter. You want, because that's be more effective is to get it done.
So from what I'm hearing, first of all, as you can all see, we are really excited and passionate about solving a problem that affects the entire ecosystem. So I'm really looking forward to your involvement and helping us to solve this on a greater scale so that this could become mainstream down the road. So that's what I have to say. I'm here for that, and I love working with this group. It is just so energizing and impactful at every meeting.
The one thing I'll take away from the safe space, and the reason that I'm as excited about it as I am, is that I'm seeing a problem being addressed by the people who are involved in time, in real time, with solutions, with a trust, and an open communication, without a fear of needing to run to legal, without a fear of needing to make sure that their message is cleared for so-and-so to hear. These are people trying to solve problems that affect. And these aren't top-level problems. These are the problems that affect. This is Toyota model stuff. This is right down there, somebody saying, I need to fix this problem. How do I get it done? And boom, it's done. It's within the rules. It's within the scope. And if that can happen in this group, for as potentially contentious a topic as recall notifications, where people are kind of a little nervous about recalls, what else can we do? What other great problems can we solve that make people nervous but actually will move the industry leap years forward? All right, well, with that, we are running low on time, and I'm keeping people from lunch, and I will never do that. So thank you for your questions. Thank you online for your questions. Thank you very much, panelists. I appreciate your contributions. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.